Alright, part 2 of the best base locations guide. So in this part I will be covering coal and sulfur bases. So you unlock your third base somewhere around level 31 I think. And then you'll be able to build a mining outpost for either coal or sulfur. And it depends a little bit on which one you want the most. Sulfur is used for gunpowder to make ammunition, and coal is used for the refined metal, like the new pickaxe and stuff like that, and it's also used for some of the ammo. So you probably want to have both. There is a mining site for both of them. You unlock the sulfur mining site at level 45 and the coal mine at level 41. Now they did change these in Feybreak to require you to defeat a tower boss. So for the sulfur mine you need to beat the level 45 tower boss in the desert. And for the coal mine you need to defeat the level 40 boss at the Mount Obsidian. So it depends a little bit on how comfortable you are at tackling these bosses when the mines do unlock. They unlock at level 45 and level 41. So you should be able to do the bosses, but it can be a little bit tricky if you're new to the game to defeat them at that level. And what I used to do before is skip a coal base entirely until I had the mining site for coal. So I didn't, you unlock the ability to build stuff with coal at level 34, but I waited until I was level 41, built the mining site and just used the regular metal stuff and the ore spheres and ammo until I had a mining site, because I didn't want to commit to a coal base. I just had a sulfur base instead, but it's a little bit up to you how you want this to play out. I'm gonna start with covering the coal bases. So you need, first of all, you need mining level 3. So something like a dig toys is good. And then you will move on to astigons and stuff like that later in the game, but you need at least mining level 3 to mine coal. So the first base I'm going to show is this classic ore coal peak here. So you can see it's here, next to the Valley Alpha boss, just here in the almost center of the old map. You have this sort of peak. So there, when you get there the first time, there will be some enemies on top usually, like a Musanda or these NPCs. You clear them out, you build your base probably, or the pal box on this low peak here. And then you also get both ore and coal. So until you unlock the mining site 2, natural ore is usually better than the mining site 1, unless you have super buffed up work speed pals. But you probably just want to have a couple of ore nodes and some coal nodes until you have that mining site, so it's a good option for both. And usually the pals don't take a full day. They respawn, the nodes themselves respawn each day. So you probably have some leftover time for your pals to mine the ore and the coal. You can have a furnace or something as well here and just have it as a mining outpost for the refined metal itself. So the second coal base, or rather the second and third, are these two peaks in the desert up here. So you have these two sort of flat, a little bit of dunes, and level 30 to 35-ish pals. You got some Toko, stuff like that. You also have two oil nodes, but they're not super relevant. It's not something you unlock until level 50, and by the time you do use oil, you probably won't be using natural coal nodes, you'll be using the mining site instead. That's just a little added benefit if you care about that. Then you also have a skill fruit tree nearby on both of these peaks. So I'm going to show the other one as well. Alright, so here is this second peak, just to the north of Dune Shelter. So the first one was here. Here's the second one. It also has a skill fruit tree. It's a little bit hilly. There's a little bit of a slope here as well. But just as a mining base, it works fine. Several ore nodes, or coal nodes rather, as well. So it's a pretty basic coal mining base, also on top of the peak. It's a little bit bigger, might have some more hostile pals spawning nearby. So you probably don't want to use too many low-level pals at this location. And then this one, it's a little bit hidden away, is another one that I like to use for a coal base. You also have two oil nodes, but as mentioned, not super relevant. You have the coal here on this little outcrop. It's a little bit hidden away, so it's mostly for multiplayer servers. You got this little spot here if you want to build a second base, maybe your main base nearby in a more sort of nice looking location. Got a messenger here as well, not super relevant, but it's just a decent spot if you want to build two bases close to each other. It's not something I mentioned too much in the previous video, but it's something that will become relevant as you progress into the game. Bases that are far away from each other don't really function so well. So if you want to have like an efficient mining outpost, you really want to keep it within render distance of where you are. So if you're spending most of your time in your main base, you probably want to have your mining outpost either be as a main base or really close to your main base. Because what happens otherwise, if you have like a base here, and then you have your main base somewhere in the starting zone from where you started out with from the previous part rather, then you might find that you visit the base and there's just a bunch of ore lying on the ground and maybe stuff isn't getting mined as efficiently as it should be. And that's just because you're leaving the render distance. It's something, hopefully, that gets patched eventually. But this is just a nice option for that, to have as a mining outpost and then build up your main base nearby. But don't build too much because you're probably going to want to move away once you do start using the coal mining site anyway. And here is another interesting coal base because it's pretty close to the Anubis boss location. So you have these coal nodes here, and then you can build your base here, summon your base pals, and then once per day you can sort of aggro the alpha boss over here into your main base, or not your main base, but the base, so that your base pals will help you fight it, because it's a pretty strong pal to fight on your own. If you do that once per day, it's a pretty good way to just catch a couple of these Anubis if you don't want to breed for them for some reason, just to get them a little bit earlier. So that's why you would use this base location, if you just want to use your base pals to help you fight this boss. And then once the boss gets low, you just go to the pal box, remove your pal so they don't accidentally kill it, and finish it off with a Ring of Mercy and some spheres. Or you just kill it for whatever loot you want. It drops some souls and it has a chance for a tech book, but it's mostly if you want to catch a worker pal at a little bit of an earlier level, and if you don't want to breed for it for some reason. Because breeding can be pretty expensive. Maybe you're breeding for something else with your first few cakes that you have. So it's nice to have the ability to catch this pal early. And it can also help you mine the coal itself if you don't have a good pals. But this is also where you catch these dig toys. So this is the pal you want to start mining that coal for you. It's just a good location to catch pals that can mine for you. But there are a couple of coal locations in this desert. But I think that one that I showed is probably the better option you will have for this. So coal is quite common. Like I've showed this base, this one here, down there, and then also the one on the peak here. But there's a lot of coal clusters spread around the map. So you can pick really any one you like. The ones I've showed are just, either they just have a lot of coal, they're semi-flat, or they have a little bit of a bonus like the skill fruit trees, or this boss here that you can drag into your base and fight. Then you have this location here, over by Mount Obsidian, pretty close to Fisherman's Point. It's pretty flat, that's the main point why I'm showing it, because it's more flat than the others. You have more building opportunities to build stuff around here. It's not super big compared to the big flat plateaus around the dunes, but it's a little bit more flat than those sand dune locations. So it's also an option. A little bit less coal, but maybe you don't need that many nodes in your base and you're fine with a little bit less. Also has one ore node. And then you have this location here next to the waterfall. It also has an oil node. You got a little bit of stone, but you probably don't want that. You can have a little bit of tricky building with getting up to those nodes for the pals, but overall it's a little bit bigger than the previous one. Also quite flat if you do manage to build it correctly. And then you also have like some sulfur here if you just want to grab a little bit of ammo each day that you will manually mine. But overall it's a little bit trickier to build than the other locations, but some people do enjoy having more terrain to work with in their base. So that's the last coal location that I'm going to show before moving on to sulfur. The sulfur part will also include a base that has both sulfur and coal. Just keep that in mind, it is coming up in the next part of this video. And there's also one thing I forgot to mention about this spot next to the waterfall. You're also really close to the predator Digtoys. If you do want to kill it for some predator cores and giant pal souls each day, you can do that. They respawn at dawn. That's a little bit of an added benefit for this location as well. Alright, so about sulfur. Before showing the bases, I'm just gonna give some basic info about sulfur. You can start using it at level 21. It seems to only need mining level 1, so it's lower than both ore and coal. Ore needs level 2 and coal would need level 3. It looks like it only needs a mining level 1 to work. And then it depends a little bit on what kind of ammo you use. I prefer not using too much gunpowder. You mostly save it for using it against tower bosses. And then when I'm just fighting regular pals, I'm using my pal damage and the fire and poison crossbows. Just so I'm not using too much sulfur. Because generally, since you're a little bit... you have a bottleneck about like how many bases you can build. You probably don't want to dedicate one base to sulfur that much. What you can also do is just move a base temporarily to a sulfur base. That's also something I've done. You build a sulfur base, build yourself up a nice stash of gunpowder, and then you move that base somewhere else. You don't need a whole lot of gunpowder. It's not something that you're gonna be using a whole lot of while leveling, unless you're just spraying an assault rifle everywhere. So as long as you keep in mind that you want to not like use all your sulfur and gunpowder all the time. If you're good with like maintaining your stash, you can just have a little bit of an outpost, or you use this location here, just next to the fast travel and the tower boss at the middle of Mount Obsidian. There's a lot of sulfur right here, so you can just teleport here once per day and manually mine, or whenever you run out of gunpowder, you do a little mining tour here and collect these, and it will probably sustain you. But I'm still going to show some sulfur-based locations for mining outposts if you do want to build up a little bit of a stash, which is something that I usually do while leveling. I keep it for maybe 10 to 20 in-game days and then move it away again. So starting off with this ledge here, just next to Astegon, pretty close to this fast travel here, pretty central in the mountain. I like to use this spot because there's a lot of sulfur nodes. So this is where I usually build a temporary mining outpost just to build up a nice stash of gunpowder. I usually build the pal box somewhere around here. And then the thing about this lava is that you need to use floating pals. So something like Digtoys will go into the lava and probably die. So I usually just put a bunch of tombats, because floating pals will not take damage from the lava. So just catching a bunch of tombats or any floating pal, you can check yourself what kind of pal does not take damage from the lava. But I recommend just a bunch of tombats. You can have some vanworms to collect the sulfur itself. But this is my personal favorite spot. This is where I usually build a sulfur outpost for a couple of in-game days while leveling, before moving it to another location to do something else than sulfur. The second location is this location right here on the side of the mountain. Some benefits is that it's pretty close to stuff like Jet Dragon. There's not a lot of fast travel points around this side of the mountain, so it's a little bit of an access base as well. It's got a couple of sulfur nodes. It's not super exposed to lava like the last one was, but you might still find your pals, especially if you're traveling back and forth. You might find some pals being on the lava when you travel here. So you maybe want to build, or you build in a way that they don't walk out there, or you again just use the tombats and they won't take that fire damage. And then you have this spot as well, just next to Jet Dragon. Again, it's a bit of a access base. There's quite a lot of sulfur here, but you'll see there's also a lot of lava. So again, floating pals that don't take lava damage, or you need to build around it, which can be very tricky here. But it's also a good sulfur base to have as either a permanent base, if you want to build a permanent sulfur base, but again, I recommend it as an outpost. So it's mostly, like as I said, I build here, but if that spot is taken, or if for some reason just want to build like a better fast travel location or something here, this base is also very good to use. And then just next to the previous base is the mixed base I was talking about before. You have 3 coal and 1 sulfur. And this is really the only base that has both. If you want to use one base for both, you will get a bit of coal and a bit of sulfur. Not as much as you would using a pure base for either one. So it's better to actually have like one of those with 8 of each nodes and move the base between them. But if you just want something more passive and you don't mind a little bit slower rate, this location is the one that has both of them. But it's also a little bit of a trickier building location. It's not as flat as other options, but it's mostly if you do want to use a base that has both. So that's it for the sulfur and coal part of this guide. The next guide will probably be covering pure quartz and oil, I think, is around level 50. And then parts following that will cover hexolite, eventually maybe chromite, and some triple base locations and stuff like that. As mentioned with the render distance, you probably want to build some bases close together, so I'll be covering some good locations for that in the later stages of the game. So for now, thanks for watching.